Hello, my name is Simon Double and welcome to Inside the Rails, a monthly podcast for horse racing enthusiasts everywhere. And as ever, I'm joined by my co-host Phil Boyle from BG Racing. Hi Phil, how are you?
Hi Simon, yeah, all good thanks. Great to have been back at the races as an owner since our last recording. And yeah, really looking forward to the summer.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that sentiment. Never mind the horses, I think I could do with a bit of sun on my back. Been a bit chilly recently, but never mind. Now look, we've got Chris Dixon, broadcaster, pundit, punter and jockey's agent, who will be joining us later as our special guest. So really looking forward to hearing Chris. Now, since our last podcast, I've been fairly busy at the track. I've been to Windsor, Newmarket and Leicester with mixed results. So just a quick resume of what's been going on with Solario Racing horses. Twilight Bay hated the ground at Windsor. The distance was a little bit too short. She really didn't cover herself in glory, but there'll be better days for her. She's entered at Bath and Windsor on Bank Holiday Monday, so hoping for better things from her. On the other hand, Dancing in the Woods, he made his seasonal reappearance at headquarters on the 12th of April in a Class 2 handicap. He'd been off the track, Phil, for 208 days, but I wasn't overly worried about the absence as he goes well fresh. He ran an absolute screamer, coming fourth despite stumbling in the famous dip at Newmarket, and he got blocked when going for a run. So he was only beaten 3/4 of the length and really pleased about that. So then we thought, we'll go to Leicester 11 days later to try and win the race we won last year. He went off favourite. Now, I don't know if listeners are aware of this, but statistically, around 1 in 3 favourites win. Well, we were one of the 2 in 3 who get beaten. Never mind, he was still fourth, not beaten far, and he's now been in the prize money in 17 of his 20 races. He's a really consistent sort and an absolute dream of a horse to have in a syndicate.
Yeah, I'm sure you must be delighted with him, Simon. It's great to have a horse like that that's consistent and getting into the finishes, getting competitive every time they run. That's just what the syndicate owners want from their runners. Yeah, he's doing you proud at the moment. I should point out to the listeners we're recording this on Tuesday the 26th of April, so I actually had a runner yesterday with Far Too Beautiful at Lingfield. Unfortunately, that means the disappointment is still a bit raw as she came under pressure a long way out, and despite hanging on to second into the home straight, she weakened and was well beaten. We know she's got a lot of ability, having won on debut last season, but she's probably the opposite of Dancing in the Woods in that she's been pretty inconsistent since, which is quite frustrating for us all. We were hoping that the winter break would have helped her, but I must admit we're still looking for answers with her. Perhaps she just doesn't like the all-weather surfaces, as her 3 worst races to date have now been on those tracks. So we'll look for a turf race for her in May, which could be a busy month for me, as we should have Dynamic Cape back on the racecourse in May as well. How about you? What have you got in May? What's in store for the Solario Racing horses?
Well, just before we go on to that, I will just say that I always think to try and give you and your shareholders a bit of hope, I think any horse who wins on its debut can't be all bad. And of course, Far Too Beautiful did that. So keep with the faith, Now, look, I've already mentioned Twilight Bay, hopefully going to Bath. Woody will have a little break. We're aiming him at a big handicap at the end of May. I think he likes breaks between his races, so we're hopefully going for a £30,000 race there. Sharp Distinction, nice 3-year-old with Dean Ivory. He goes for a racecourse gallop on the grass at Newmarket very soon. And 2-year-old Tarantino with Amy Murphy, that's gearing up to make its debut, hopefully during the first half of May. So quite a lot of action going on in the future. We actually took Tarantino to Newbury for the first of the Great British Racing Ownership Days, and he paraded in front of the crowd. One of only 3 horses actually who were paraded, but that gave him a nice what we call away day experience. Now, you and I both had trade stands there, and we were both interviewed about not only our syndicates, but about Inside the Rails.
Yeah, we were. And hopefully some of the people listening now are doing so because they heard about the podcast at Newbury that day. Yeah, those ownership days are a great initiative. It would be good if the syndicate stands could be a bit more central to catch more passing traffic during the day in future. We were a little bit isolated at Newbury, but we did catch everybody on the way in and on the way out of the track. And a few people came up over the course of the afternoon to have a look round as well. And I think it's great that Great British Racing and the race courses are really getting behind shared ownership like that and helping us to spread the word. I know there's similar days already booked at York and Perth and Haydock, and then later on at Windsor, Cheltenham and Ascot this year. And obviously we'll be pushing them all via our Twitter account, which if anybody's not following us, it's at Inside the Rails on Twitter.
We'll certainly be doing that, and we are always very keen to promote shared ownership, a great initiative by Great British Racing there. I shall certainly be at the Windsor and Ascot events. I can't go to the next one at York on the 13th of May because I've got a visit organised to Sheikh Mohammed's famous Dali stud for my owners. And I mention that because it's those sorts of days which syndicate members can go to. It's not just, is it, about going to the races as an owner, important though that is. It's going to the stables, to the gallops and enjoying hospitality events which some syndicate organisations arrange for their owners.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think people feel that the race course is the be-all and end-all, and it certainly isn't. And also, I know from talking to those people at Newbury, as I'm sure you did, that a lot of people feel that racehorse ownership is just unattainable, too expensive, and they're often surprised by what level of experience they can receive for their money, more than just trips to the races, as we've just said. I love to get shareholders behind the scenes at the stables, seeing their horse sort of in its home environment. And good syndicates and racing clubs provide great communications. They keep everyone updated on the progress of the horse and just keep everyone really engaged. I also think that owners at any level were really well looked after by the racecourses. I mean, obviously, if you own a significant share of the horse and you go racing as part of a small group, then the racecourses may be able to offer more than they could if you arrive as a small shareholder in a big group. But increasingly, even those larger groups are getting more than would be available to the general public. There's things like dedicated lounges, complimentary hot drinks, and that all-important access to the trainer and the jockey pre- and post-race. I noticed at Lingfield yesterday, interestingly, that they've now created an additional owners briefing area just outside the paddock. It's all labelled up and specially dedicated for that reason. So if there's a big group and they can't provide paddock access to everybody, because that becomes a safety issue if there's a massive group of owners in the paddock, they can still provide that area just outside, and the trainer and the jockey can come there and still chat to all of the owners. So yeah, that kind of initiative is getting more and more common. And yeah, I think that should really be welcomed. Anyhow, changing the subject, and now to embarrass myself in the pursuit of graciously allowing you a moment of glory. We tipped some horses to follow last month. Now, unfortunately, each one of those I named has run since and been unplaced. Actually, a couple of them haven't run since, but everyone that has not managed to make the frame so far. So I haven't exactly covered myself with glory. So I now need to ask innocently, but of course with full knowledge of the answer, unfortunately, has the horse to follow that you provided to the listeners run since last time?
Well, look, it might have done. Look, I used to play the saxophone, but on this occasion, I'm going to blow my own trumpet. I don't do it very often. Maljoom. And one horse that caught my eye at the opening Donny meeting was a horse of Willie Haggis's, an unraced horse called Maljoom. I'm going to put my head above the parapet, Phil, and reckon that could end up being a 90-plus horse. Well, at Kempton, he beat the odds-on favourite, a horse rated 92, and won comfortably. And after just 2 races, Maljoom is rated 101. I don't think we've heard the last of him.
Probably not. And yeah, right now it's a good job the podcast is audio only, as it will mean that the listeners can't see my gritted teeth as on a month where all my selections were beaten. I get to congratulate you most sincerely on your tipping prowess. So well done. I'm absolutely delighted for you. And is it time to move on yet?
I think it is. I need to get rid of this smug grin on my face. Anyway, we will move on. Now, look, although the flat season has been ramping up and we've seen some trials for the classics, there have been some big meetings this month over the jumps with Aintree and the end of the jump season, the finale at Sandown. We've had the Grand National, of course. Now, they say there's always a story with the Grand National winner, but surely not many could have seen amateur jockey Sam Whaley-Cohen winning on his last ever ride on a 50-1 shot, on a 7-year-old with that age group not having won the big race since 1940. And also the winner, Noble Yates, was just the second novice to win since 1958. The year before I was born. It was that long ago.
It certainly was, and it was a great story. I always enjoy Aintree. This year was no exception. Although I must admit I had mixed emotions on the Grand National itself. I think I mentioned Fiddler on the Roof last month as a sort of a possible throwaway selection for the race, and I then looked at it in more detail and produced a horse-by-horse profile guide for my shareholders, and I shared that on Inside the Rails Twitter feed before the race as well. I ended up with 6 horses for the race, and it's fair to say most of them failed to finish, but I still had 2 live chances heading to the last couple of fences with Fiddler on the Roof and Any Second Now. And then after the last, when Any Second Now moved into the lead, I was starting to celebrate another great story, because he could have been considered an unlucky loser last year, and there he was making amends, and there I was getting ready to make a big splash on social media about how brilliant I was at tipping the winner of the National when, along came Noble Yates and deprived me of that little effort. So yes, it was a great story, but I must admit I was in the same camp as Ruby Walsh, who was on ITV, and he was very professional in discussing the great story, whilst he was trying to hide the disappointment that his dad's horse, Any Second Now, had been beaten. And I knew exactly how he felt, I must admit.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, look, I'd like to move on to cover some racing stories that we've covered in previous podcasts that seem to be pretty topical. Now, the first is a subject close to your heart, going reports. Solaria Racing actually pulled a horse out to Dancing in the Woods at Windsor a few weeks back because the going had changed, according to the jockeys, but the official going hadn't changed. And no less for a man and trainer and former champion jockey Richard Hughes has also been having a go on the subject. You might have seen that, Phil.
Yes, I did. And both you and the listeners will probably be pleased to hear that I don't plan to go off on one again this month, but it's definitely something that needs some action. I'm not sure what the answer is, because we've got a scientific measure of going that's already in place with the Turf Track's going stick, which measures the ground conditions, but that seems to not be trusted by some people, or perhaps it's not sort of always reliable because maybe it's not used correctly. That's something that's worth a bit more exploration, I think. But the alternative is that we rely on people, the human factor, and increasingly that doesn't seem to work either. It's a tricky one, but I feel there's a bit of a perception brewing that clerks of the course are giving out going reports that are more focused on avoiding non-runners than they are actually sort of totally upfront with the going conditions. And I must admit, I think if that causes trust to break down between the clerks and the trainers, then we'll be in quite a sorry state, really.
Yeah, I agree with that totally, Phil. It's all about trust, isn't it? Now, another subject, the possible 5-day Cheltenham Festival, that's still rumbling away, and there's now a consultation taking place. What do you make of what's going on there, Phil? Yeah,
it's another one where what's being said doesn't seem to tie up with the perception for me. The messaging behind this consultation is it's taking place because it seems like a good time to tackle something that's always being discussed. But the same messaging says that Jockey Club racecourses who run Cheltenham have no agenda here and would be happy either way, whether it stayed as 4 days or moved to 5. I did hear the managing director of Cheltenham queried on this and asked who's clamouring for a 5-day festival, to which the response was no one, which doesn't really seem to make sense, because we're doing a review, presumably because it's being discussed all the time. Well, somebody must be in favour if it's being discussed all the time. I mean, I must admit that the real argument I can see for a 5-day festival is the additional income that it would generate. And I mean, I know I said last month I thought it was pretty inevitable for that reason, because just the commercial side of things. But whilst it should be said that any money raised from a 5th day would get back into racing in some form, that's because Jockey Club racecourses plough any profits they make back into racing. If the official line is they don't mind either way, then I'm not entirely sure who is pushing for it. I think that at the moment we're reading all the time about those that don't want it and why they don't want it. It'd be interesting to hear who does want it and why they do want it, because it seems like a very unbalanced debate at the moment.
Well, I don't know. Did your parents ever think you should have been a lawyer? That was beautifully argued, Phil. Absolutely, seriously, beautifully put, and really put some clarity on the issue. Well, certainly former champion jockey AP McCoy doesn't want a 5-day festival. He absolutely slated the idea in the Racing Post the other day. The other story that won't go away is the gambling review, which is very close to our hearts and really important to the industry. One of our previous guests, Lee Mottershead, spoke very eloquently about that a few months ago. The possibilities that Lee mentioned are still hanging over us and could be quite damaging for racing, couldn't they?